I was forced to marry the weakest prince. But on our wedding night, he awoke as the lost Alpha King. The kingdom of Urindor lay shrouded in shadows, a land where ancient forests whispered secrets of kings long forgotten, and the winds carried the scent of old magic. Within the marble walls of the royal palace, candlelight flickered across carved corridors, casting long shadows on the cold stone floors. The palace was alive with preparation for the wedding of Lady Alara, daughter of House Velaris, to Prince Kael, the youngest and by all whispers, the weakest son of the royal line. Alara had grown accustomed to power. Her sharp mind and steady will were her armor in a world where women were often pawns. Yet now, she was being handed like a token to a man who seemed barely capable of commanding a court, much less ruling a kingdom. She had heard the court's gossip, the weak prince, the fragile heir, the one who would never ascend beyond his small comforts. On the eve of her wedding, Alara paced her chambers, her silken gown brushing against the polished floor. The weight of the arrangement pressed upon her chest, heavier than any crown she had ever imagined. Her reflection in the mirror looked back at her, a woman of fire and intellect, bound to a man of rumors and shadows. Kael, meanwhile, sat in the dim light of his own chambers. The prince of whispers and doubts stared at the ceiling as if it held the answers to his life. He was known for his gentleness, his quiet ways, and the way he seemed always to avoid the harshness of politics. But there was more to Kael than the court had ever seen. Beneath his timid exterior lay the echoes of a past he barely remembered, a crown stolen, a kingdom lost, a power sealed deep within his soul. As the bells tolled across Urindor, signaling the hour of the ceremony, Alara felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity. She had never met Kael in the light of private space, away from courtiers and whispers. Would he be the timid, fragile man everyone said he was, or was there a depth to him that the court had failed to see? The ceremony was held in the grand cathedral of the palace, a hall that had witnessed centuries of triumphs and tragedies. Stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the stone floor, sunlight illuminating the gold and crimson banners that hung proudly from the ceiling. Courtiers in elaborate garments murmured among themselves, eyes flicking toward the couple. Ilara's heart beat steadily, refusing to betray the storm of thoughts that ran through her mind. She stepped forward with grace, her chin high, her eyes fixed on the figure waiting at the altar. Kael stood there, his posture careful, his expression composed yet distant. He was not the fragile creature the gossip had promised, but neither did he exude the commanding aura of a king. He was simply quiet, a shadow among the bright tapestries and shining armor of the court. The priest's voice filled the cathedral, echoing off the stone walls. Words of binding, of unity, of promises exchanged. Alara's gaze lingered on Kael, searching for the spark that might reveal the man beneath the title, beneath the whispers. She sensed something there, a flicker, faint but undeniable, a shadow of strength hidden beneath the measured politeness. When the ceremony concluded, and the guests departed with whispers of curiosity and anticipation, Alara followed the attendants to the chambers where she and Kael would spend their first night as husband and wife. The room was vast, draped in rich fabrics of deep red and violet, with candlelight dancing across golden embroidery. Despite the opulence, the air felt heavy with expectation, the quiet before a storm yet to come. Kael entered after a moment, his steps careful, his hands clasped lightly in front of him. He did not look weak, he simply appeared cautious, as though he were testing the weight of the role he had been forced to assume. His eyes, dark and deep, met hers for the first time without courtly restraint, and in that instant Alara saw something she had not expected, a flicker of something powerful, something ancient and untamed. She cleared her throat, trying to maintain the poise that had served her so well in the court. "This is our chamber," she said, her voice steady, though her heart beat faster than usual. Kael nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes," he said softly. and soon we will understand each other." Alara frowned slightly. His words were strange, almost cryptic, yet there was a weight to them that made her pulse quicken. She had prepared herself for a timid, pliable husband, someone who would follow her lead or fade into the background. But Kale's presence was different. It commanded attention, though not with arrogance or noise. It was quiet, deliberate, like a river that ran deep beneath the surface of a placid land. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional soft word or polite gesture. Alara observed him closely, noting the subtle strength in his hands, the way his shoulders bore an invisible weight, the way his gaze held something unreadable. And then, as the moon climbed high above the palace, casting silver light through the tall windows, a strange tremor passed through the room. Kale stiffened, a low hum escaping his lips, almost as if the wind itself spoke through him. The air thickened, and the shadows seemed to twist and bend around him. Alara's heart caught in her throat as she realized that the man before her was no ordinary prince. The energy in the room pulsed with something ancient, something alive, something that had waited a long time to awaken. "Kale," she whispered, stepping closer. He turned to her, and in the moonlight his transformation became undeniable. His eyes, once calm and dark, now burned with a light that seemed to come from within, a light that carried the weight of kingdoms, of lost thrones, of powers forgotten by time. His presence expanded, filling the room, touching every corner with an almost divine authority. Alara's breath caught. She had been prepared for meekness, for fragility. But this was something entirely different. The prince, the weakest of the royal line, had become something more, something legendary. Kale's voice, when he spoke, was not the gentle murmur of the man she had met, but deep and resonant, echoing with the authority of the Alpha King he had once been. "Alara," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "Do you see me now?" She nodded, unable to find words. Her mind raced with awe and fear, excitement and confusion. The man she had been forced to marry was not the fragile figure she had imagined. He was a king of myths, a force of nature, a being who had returned from the edges of legend to reclaim what was lost. The night stretched on, a quiet storm of revelation and tension. Alara watched him, captivated and unsettled, as Kale moved through the chamber with a grace that belied his strength. It was clear he was learning to control the awakening power within him, balancing the raw force of his past with the man he was now meant to be. Though fear lingered at the edges of her heart, so too did fascination. She had come expecting weakness, and yet she found herself standing before a man who could command worlds, yet whose vulnerability shone through in his moments of hesitation, in the way he glanced at her as though seeking her understanding, her trust, her presence to anchor him. As the night wore on, Alara realized something profound. She was no longer bound merely by duty or fear. She was bound by curiosity, by a growing recognition of the man behind the legend, by the promise of what could rise from their union. And then, as the first light of dawn touched the palace towers, Kale approached her. His eyes, still glowing faintly with the remnants of the night's awakening, softened as he extended his hand. "Alara," he said quietly, "I am not what I seem, but perhaps together we can discover what I am meant to be." Alara took his hand, her own trembling slightly. In that touch she felt a spark, one that carried the weight of destiny, of power, and of something unspoken but undeniable. She nodded, a small, resolute motion. "Then we will face it together," she said, and in the quiet dawn the palace seemed to hold its breath. The bride and the Alpha King, once a prince of whispers, now bound by fate and awakening power, stood together at the edge of a new world, a world where kingdoms would tremble, legends would rise, and love would become both their greatest strength and their deepest challenge. The storm of destiny had begun, and there was no turning back. The morning sun spilled gold across the towers of Urendor, but the kingdom below stirred with unease. Word of the prince's transformation had traveled faster than wildfire. The weakest prince was gone. In his place, a force awakened. A king of legend returned. Courtiers whispered in corners, fearful of the power that had emerged overnight. Some bowed in awe, others in terror, and all watched Kale, the Alpha King, with wary eyes. Lady Alara moved through the palace corridors with quiet resolve. Her mind, as sharp as ever, raced with questions. The man she had married was no longer the timid prince she had expected. He was stronger, wiser, and yet haunted. There were shadows behind his gaze, reminders of a past he had barely survived. And she realized with a strange mix of fear and admiration that he would need her just as much as she would need him. Kale stood in the grand council hall, the sunlight glinting off the golden armor of statues that lined the walls. Today, he would meet the advisors and generals who had once dismissed him. Now their deference was forced, but their doubt lingered, hidden behind polite words and veiled glances. Alara followed him into the hall, her steps silent on the marble floors. Kale's presence was commanding, yet he carried himself with a careful humility. He did not seek to intimidate. He simply existed as someone who had returned to claim what was his, and who had the weight of his past failures pressing down on him. "Your Majesty," one advisor said, bowing low, "it is an honor to see you restored." His words were cautious, coated in the politeness of fear. Kale nodded, his dark eyes scanning the room. "I am honored to serve Urindor," he said evenly. His voice carried authority, yet not arrogance, "and I will not allow the mistakes of the past to define the future." Whispers moved like currents through the council. Some exchanged looks of relief, others of skepticism. Kale's awakening had changed everything, not just for the kingdom, but for the fragile balance of power within the palace. After the meeting, Kale and Alara walked through the palace gardens. The scent of blooming roses mixed with the crisp morning air. Birds sang, their voices bright and innocent, but the couple felt as though they were alone in a world that had shifted overnight. "You carry the weight of something more than this throne," Alara said softly. She walked beside him, careful not to step too close, yet unable to resist the magnetic pull of his presence. Kale's gaze met hers, heavy with unspoken thoughts. "I have felt it since the first moment I woke," he admitted. "A power that does not belong entirely to me, and a memory that refuses to let me rest." Alara's hand brushed against his lightly, almost accidentally, but Kale paused, the contact sending a shiver through both of them. "You are different from those in the court," he said. "You do not fear me, not truly." "I fear what you might lose if you do not control yourself," she replied, her voice firm but gentle. "And I fear the man you were before, the one who vanished from history." Kale exhaled slowly. "Then you will help me," he said. "I cannot do this alone." Her heart skipped a beat. She had expected to lead, to command, perhaps even to protect him from the world. But now she realized she would need to guide him through his own shadows, and he would rely on her strength as much as she would rely on his. Days passed in a haze of counsels, training, and whispered warnings from courtiers. Kale grew stronger each day, learning to balance the immense power within him with the responsibilities of leadership. Yet there were moments when he faltered, visions of his past life, glimpses of betrayal, and the heavy guilt of mistakes that had cost lives. In those moments, Alara's presence was his anchor. One evening, under the silver glow of the moon, Kale and Alara stood on a balcony overlooking the city. The streets below were quiet, lit by lanterns that flickered like fireflies. "Do you ever fear that this power might consume you?" Alara asked. Kale's gaze rested on the horizon where the forest met the sky. "Every moment," he admitted. "It is a fire that could warm or burn. I must learn to master it, or it will master me." Alara reached for his hand again, this time deliberately, and held it. The warmth of her touch grounded him. "Then let me stand beside you," she said. "Not as a pawn, not as a wife who obeys, but as someone who believes in you, in the man and the king." A shadow passed over Kale's face, fleeting but deep. "You see me," he said quietly, almost as if confessing a secret, "and yet you remain, you do not run." "I do not run," she whispered, "because if you fall, I will fall with you, but if you rise, we rise together." The nights in the palace became a delicate dance of power and understanding. Alara discovered the depths of Kale's abilities, how he could sense the emotions of those around him, how shadows seemed to bend at his will, and how he could command the loyalty of even the most rebellious creatures of the forests surrounding Erendor. Yet she also saw his vulnerability, the moments when the weight of memory and expectation threatened to overwhelm him. It was during one of these quiet nights that the first real danger of Kale's awakening emerged. A sorcerer thought to be long defeated had returned to claim revenge on the royal line. The news came via a trembling messenger, breathless and pale. "The sorcerer, he calls himself Malric," the messenger stammered. "He claims he will undo the kingdom, for the line of the Alpha King has returned." Kale's expression hardened. The Alpha King within him stirred, ready to face a challenge long awaited, yet he did not move rashly. Instead, he turned to Alara. "I will not face this alone," he said. Alara nodded, her resolve firm. "Then we will face him together. You have your strength and I have mine, and together we will be more than what he expects." The coming days were filled with preparation. The palace transformed into a fortress of strategy and caution. Advisors and generals whispered tactics, while Kale and Alara studied maps of the kingdom and surrounding forests. Yet amid the tension, a subtle intimacy grew between them. They did not need words to communicate. The shared glances, the light touches, the silent understanding that neither could face what was coming alone. One evening, as they practiced defensive spells in a secluded courtyard, Kale faltered. A surge of power escaped him, sending shadows swirling across the stones like living things. Alara steadied him, placing a hand on his chest. "You are not weak," she said softly, "and you never were. You are waiting to remember who you are." Kale's eyes met hers, filled with a storm of emotion. "I am not just Kale," he murmured. "I am the Alpha King, and yet I am still the man you agreed to marry. Can you see both? Can you accept both?" Alara's heart ached with longing and fear, but she held his gaze steadily. "I see you," she said, "all of you, and I will not turn away." That night, as the moon rose high above the palace, Kale awoke from a vision. He had glimpsed the sorcerer's plan, the devastation that could follow, and the ghosts of mistakes long buried. His body tensed, his mind racing. Alara, sensing his unrest, reached for him and their hands met. "Tell me what you see," she whispered. "I see fire," Kale said, his voice low and urgent. "I see shadows that seek to undo everything I have fought to reclaim. If I am not careful, if I am not ready, Erendor could fall." Alara drew closer, placing her hand over his heart. "Then we will be ready," she said. "We will rise together. Your power and my courage together, we are unstoppable." The tension between them was almost tangible, a mix of trust, fear, and unspoken longing. Neither needed more than the presence of the other to feel a sense of balance in a world that had become unpredictable and dangerous. As dawn approached, the first faint light brushing the horizon, Kale's powers pulsed faintly, a reminder of the storm that lay within him. Alara watched him, feeling a mixture of awe and determination. They were bound not only by duty but by destiny, and by a growing connection neither could deny. And then, just as the sun peeked over the mountains, a distant shadow appeared on the horizon. Dark clouds twisted unnaturally, and the wind carried an acrid scent like smoke and iron. The sorcerer had arrived. Kale turned to Alara, his eyes blazing with controlled fury and quiet fear. "This is only the beginning," he said. Alara's hand found his again. "Then let them come," she replied. "We will face this together, always." The storm of destiny was rising, and the first battle had yet to begin. The kingdom of Erendor trembled under the approaching shadow. Dark clouds coiled like serpents over the distant mountains, and the air carried a cold, bitter taste that stung the tongue. News had reached the palace that Malric, the sorcerer who had haunted the royal line for decades, had arrived with forces beyond imagination, creatures born from shadow and storm, bound to his command by ancient, cruel magic. Kale stood on the balcony of the royal tower, his dark cloak whipping in the wind. He had grown into his power with every passing day, learning to balance the force within him with the responsibility of leadership. Yet even the Alpha King felt the weight of this battle pressing on his shoulders. He was not just fighting for the kingdom. He was fighting for the people he had once lost, for the man he had once been, and for the woman who had chosen to stand beside him. Ilara approached quietly, her steps soft on the stone floor. She placed a hand on his arm, steadying him without words. "The moment has come," she said. "We cannot wait any longer. They will strike before we are ready if we do not act now." Kale nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon where the shadow of Malric's army crept closer with each passing minute. "I have felt the weight of this fight since I awoke," he admitted. "But now, with you beside me, I know I will not falter." Ilara's hand squeezed his. "Then let us face this together. You and I not as prince and bride, but as partners in a battle that will decide the fate of everything we hold dear." The palace erupted into action. Soldiers, mages, and allies from surrounding lands were called to arms. Archers took positions on the towers, spellcasters prepared protective wards, and scouts were sent into the forests to gather intelligence on the sorcerer's movements. Despite the flurry of activity, Kale moved with a quiet authority, issuing commands that were calm yet decisive. Each decision he made reflected the balance of the Alpha King's power and the man's growing wisdom. That night, under the silver glow of a full moon, Kale and Ilara met in the courtyard to prepare a ritual that could amplify his power against Malric. The stones beneath their feet were etched with runes that glowed faintly, resonating with the energy of the kingdom itself. "This ritual requires trust," Kale explained, his voice low but steady. "It will draw upon everything I am and everything you are willing to give." "Are you ready?" Ilara nodded, her eyes unwavering. "I am ready," she said, "and I trust you, Kale, in this and in all things." Kale placed his hands upon the glowing runes and the courtyard hummed with energy. Shadows swirled and twisted, responding to his will. Ilara stepped forward, placing her hands beside his. A warmth spread from their joined touch, connecting them not just as husband and wife but as partners, bound by purpose and destiny. Energy surged through Kale, stronger than ever before, and for the first time he felt fully in control of the power that had once threatened to consume him. His eyes blazed with a brilliant light, and the shadows around them bowed in recognition of his strength. Yet even as he stood fully awakened, he knew the true test awaited him beyond the palace walls. The first clash came at dawn. Malric's forces descended upon the city like a living storm. Shadows moved like wolves through the streets, fire erupted from enchanted staffs, and the cries of soldiers filled the air. Kale led the defense with precision and courage, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Ilara fought alongside him, not as a mere observer but as a strategist and warrior in her own right. She guided archers, directed mages, and moved with a grace and confidence that complemented Kale's power. Together, they became a force the enemy had not anticipated, a combination of raw strength and unwavering intelligence. Amid the battle, Malric revealed himself, stepping from the shadow with a cloak that seemed woven from night itself. His eyes glowed with malevolence as he surveyed the battlefield, and the ground trembled with the power of his presence. "You have returned, Alpha King," Malric hissed. "But even your power will not save you. Erendor will fall as it always has." Kale stepped forward, his aura blazing. "Erendor is not yours to claim," he said. "This kingdom belongs to its people, to its future, and to those who fight for it. You will not succeed." The clash between Kale and Malric was like a storm breaking over the land. Shadows and light collided, twisting and warping reality around them. Kale drew upon all that he had reclaimed, the strength of the Alpha King, the wisdom of his past life, and the courage that Alara had inspired in him. Alara watched closely, sensing when to intervene, when to guide, and when to let Kale unleash the full force of his power. She was not afraid of his strength, for she understood it, shared it, and balanced it with her own calm resolve. In moments of uncertainty, their hands would meet, and the connection between them would anchor both their hearts and their powers. Malric unleashed a wave of shadows, aiming to consume Kale entirely, but the Alpha King held firm. Drawing on the ritual's energy, Kale created a shield of light that expanded outward, scattering the shadows like smoke in the wind. He moved with precision and fury, striking at the sorcerer with controlled power that left no room for error. As the battle raged, Kale glimpsed the man he had once been, the prince who had been underestimated, the ruler who had vanished, the king who had returned. He realized that his strength was not only in his power but in the bonds he had forged, the trust he had earned, and the love that had anchored him through fear and doubt. Finally, in a moment of perfect harmony, Kale and Alara combined their strength. She channeled her energy into him, guiding the light of the Alpha King with unwavering focus. Kale unleashed a final surge, a brilliant wave that shattered Malric's shadow, dissolving the sorcerer's power and sending him fleeing into the dark forests beyond the kingdom. The battlefield fell silent. Soldiers, weary but alive, looked to their king and his bride with awe and respect. The threat had passed, and Urindor had been saved, not by force alone, but by unity, trust, and the bond between two souls who had chosen to stand together against impossible odds. Kale turned to Alara, his eyes softening. The battle had tested him in ways nothing else could. He had faced his past, mastered his power, and reclaimed his role not just as a ruler, but as a man capable of love and vulnerability. "You were with me," he said quietly, taking her hand in both of his. "Through every shadow, every fear, every moment of doubt, you were with me." Alara smiled, her own heart full. "And you were with me," she replied. "In every silent glance, every touch, every word that said more than actions ever could. We did this together." For the first time since his awakening, Kale allowed himself to truly relax. The Alpha King, once feared and whispered about, now stood fully realized, not as a figure of legend alone, but as a man who could love, trust, and protect. The kingdom celebrated their victory, but Kale and Alara remained above the noise, standing on the balcony of the palace once more. The sun rose, golden and warm, painting the sky with hope and promise. The wind carried the sense of spring and renewal, and the shadows of the past seemed lighter, less threatening. Kale looked at Alara, seeing not just the woman he had married, but the partner who had helped him reclaim his life. "The kingdom is safe," he said softly, "but more than that, I am myself again, and it is because of you." Alara's eyes shimmered with emotion. "And it is because of you, Kale. You embraced your power, your past, and your future. You did not hide and you did not falter. And together we can face anything." The Alpha King of Urindor had returned, fully awake, fully alive, and fully human. The kingdom would remember this day, not for the battle alone, but for the union that had changed everything. The bond between a king and his bride, forged in shadows, tempered by trust, and made unbreakable by love. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the palace and the city below, Kale and Alara stood together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held. The darkness had passed, the storm had ended, and the kingdom of Urindor had a king and a queen, who were as strong together as they were apart. And though whispers of shadows would always linger at the edges of the kingdom, one truth remained. The Alpha King had returned, and beside him stood the woman who had chosen to walk through darkness to find the light. Together, they were unstoppable. The legend of Kale and Alara had only just begun.